You're welcome back. Now, calls for greater inclusion and guaranteed representation for women and persons with disabilities dominated Monday's national public hearing on the ongoing constitutional review in Abuja. The session, organized by the House of Representatives Committee on Constitution Review and chaired by the Deputy Speaker Benjamin Kalu, followed months of public consultations across Nigeria's 6 geopolitical zones. Speakers at the hearing said Nigeria's democracy cannot deepen without deliberate steps to end systemic exclusion. Former Senator Florence Ita-Giwa criticized token attention to women's issues and urged lawmakers to back the reserved seats bill.
Disability advocates pressed for stronger constitutional guarantees, citing triple jeopardy faced by women with disabilities and demanding that disability be recognized as a protected category under fundamental rights. They urged the National Assembly to ensure reserved seats for people with disabilities move beyond paper promises to mandate government at all levels to promote assistive communication and integration. The Police Officers' Wives Association, POWA, called for constitutional provisions to reserve leadership positions for women in the police, military, and paramilitary agencies, arguing that gender balance will strengthen security institutions. A coalition of female political leaders also submitted a memorandum urging swift passage of the reserved seats bill, describing it as a historic chance to correct Nigeria's gender imbalance and strengthen inclusive governance. Joining us is gender equality advocate Adenike Aloba. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
All right. Let's go into the main question. How important is this reserved seats bill and this conversation to be had at a time like this? And I ask because those who bring forward the argument that saying that we should reserve certain seats for women isn't necessarily equitable as you would push. I mean, we just had a conversation with a guest yesterday who said that are we now arguing that people should be voted based on their gender and not on their qualification? So how important is this conversation to, is it to be had at a time like this?
Thank you. I mean, this conversation has been on for a while. And let me start off by saying that if it could have worked any other way, it would have. If a difference could have been made in the political ecosystem of Nigeria to include more women, there had been a lot of work, a lot of effort invested in getting more women representation, but that hasn't worked. And that's the nature of delivering equity. The idea is if a table is imbalanced, introduce a leg to make sure that table is balanced. I do get the consternation or the worry of people who think, oh, so now we should have women in positions simply because they're women. But it's not an invalid argument. I just want to be clear because it's fair. It's fair to understand every side of the argument. However, it's a risk-benefit analysis situation. And if you weigh the risk versus the benefits far outweigh the risk of simply putting women out there just to be elected simply because they're women. Clearly, Nigeria needs intervention. And it is becoming increasingly obvious that this is the kind of intervention that would effectively not even completely turn the train around, but begin to move the train towards the right direction. Evidence, the data shows that in women participation in politics, in government, has continued to decrease. And there are several reasons why this continues to happen, different barriers from religion to economic barriers to all of these things that we have discussed and I imagine we'll discuss this morning. So my response to the question of just because they're women is that there is far more benefit to introducing an extra leg to enable equal, well, it wouldn't be equal exactly, but to enable increased representation of women. That would be my response to that. I think the benefit outweighs the risk.
Yes, the benefit outweighs the risk, and I quite agree with you. But I want to also bring back a follow-up question, which is also some of the pushback that we've received when we've had this conversation on air. Again, just yesterday, we had a guest who had said that even the women themselves don't support women at the polls, and that when women are asked to vote, they would typically not vote for themselves. So it's a bit of a tough nut to crack. What will your response be to that as well?
I mean, that argument has existed since time. Usually when conversations of gender equality come up, one of the first doors that gets shot in your face is, well, women don't support women, so what do you want us to do about it? But here is the thing. Here is the way I think about it. If all your life you have been told that your fingers are only for waving, and everywhere you turn, that message is reinforced. Your fingers are only for waving. Your fingers are only for waving. If you hear that for 20 years and then somebody comes and says, you know, you can use your fingers to do other things. You can use it to clap. You can use it to eat. You can use it to pick stuff off of the floor. Do you know how difficult it will be for you to make that shift? Let me link that back to the issue of women don't support women. I don't think it is particularly women don't support women. I think we have a society that is designed to view women in a particular lens, and the world is in such a precarious place when it comes to women and women's participation and women's rights today. Ridiculous that we're where we are today, but that's the reality. Women should be taking care of children. Women should be in the kitchen. Women should be supporting. How people come up with the idea of support simply being in the background is beyond me. But here's the thing. The problem is not that women are not simply supporting women because they're women. The problem is that we have been wired. The society is wired to think that, see, you'll find if you talk to women who think women shouldn't participate in politics, it's less about hate and less about not wanting other women to progress. And sometimes you'll find people saying, I just want to protect her. How is she going to survive in such a toxic political economy? I just don't think that women are made up. And so it's not all toxic, which is why it is important to have those conversations and explore the reasons why people are making this decision. But it is less about, oh, women not supporting women, and more about our society is wired to see women in a certain way. Women not excluded, which means that it is going to take just as much work to convince the men as it will take to convince the women. So I don't want to give fuel to that idea, even though I understand where it's coming from. I want to pivot the idea to the fact that the problem we all have is that we have lived in societies that has told us that women shouldn't be in certain places. And so it'll take just as much work as we are putting into ensuring there is political representation. It'll take that much work in behavioral communication and strategy to make sure that that changes. So let's not shift the goalpost or shift the assess to say, well, if women don't support women, it's almost like saying that, show us what you can do for yourself first before we do something. And we're saying that's not the issue here. The issue here is that the same way you need convincing, the same way the society, men need convincing. And I say that that's my nicest way of putting it. The same way men need convincing, women need convincing. We have all been conditioned to think that women should be in a certain place. And that doesn't exclude women. And the fact that the person who is on the ballot, for example, is a woman, doesn't change it doesn't change years of thinking that a woman should be in a certain place. So that's the best response to the question of women don't support women. It's less about women and more about the entire society, which means that as we're doing important work in ensuring that there is a constitutionally backed pathway to having increased representation, we have to do as much behavioral work to make sure that the idea is not just appealing or welcoming to men, it's welcoming to the whole of society, men and women inclusive.
Now, Adenike, there are quite a number of men there listening now and saying, look, why do women deserve a reserved seat? And what is so special? And what we should be looking at is the quality of representation and the ability to carry out their responsibilities. They also often make this erroneous mistake of pointing to examples of women that have had the chance. They never compare the total numbers. They just, make 1, 2, 3, 4 examples of women that were indicted for corruption or that had to be sacked for one reason or the other and say, you see? Why? Could you explain to us why that is wrong and why it's important to have female representation in politics?
let me leap off from the idea of, well, we give them an opportunity and now they're corrupt. I mean, for every this is anecdotal data, so this is not real. I don't have the exact figures, but I imagine for every woman who has been indicted or prosecuted for corruption, more men who are probably doing the same thing. Corruption does not know gender. So if we have a problem of corruption, we have to deal with the problem of corruption. Corruption is not, it doesn't change its shape or color, whether it's man or woman. So that, again, that argument is just another, it's just another goalpost moving attempt to say, well, we gave you the opportunity. But here is the thing. I use this example often, that if you don't know where the shoe pinches, you are unlikely to be able to design a solution that will fix that problem. And I say this, look at the situation of insecurity in Nigeria. I do the social experiment every time I get the chance. And I ask, in a room full of men and women, I ask the men, what's your greatest fear? And they're like, oh, the economic impact of, being kidnapped, for instance, on my family, where they get the money from and stuff like that. And also, I don't want to die. When you ask the women, the answer is almost always unequivocally rape. Now, if there is a senatorial committee on interventions for victims of kidnappings in Nigeria, and that committee is made up of men, what kind of solutions do you think they will design? That's why it's important to have representation in the room. That's why it's important to have different voices with different points of view and different experiences in the room. And you can layer this over many issues. The challenges with childbirth, maternal and child mortality, the way it is, the big issues that are obvious to women are oftentimes different. And this is not a question, and this is something we have to say often. We shouldn't have to say it, but we do have to say it often. It's not that one opinion is better than the other. It's not that one point of view is better than the other. It's that all points of view are important. And that's the best argument for having women in the room. That's the best argument for having people with a different point of view, a different idea, a different approach. And evidence has kind of shown, I could find the data and quote it for you, that women are really great in crisis. And so what happens to our, again, I'm using the example of what's on the table. What happens to our lawmaking? What happens to legislative interventions for big issues in Nigeria? For example, again, insecurity. What happens to that when we have more women in the room who can provide alternate points of view, who can provide, a different perspective, a different approach that we can bring together to bring a solution? So the question is, or the answer to the question is that there will always be better solutions when you have more people in the room with different points of view. And that's the best argument for having representation for women.
Let's talk about let's talk about persons living with disabilities. We've been talking about women, and I feel like, we said double, triple, quadruple jeopardy for women who are living with disabilities. What is the current picture of representation? We see it even in regular day-to-day living. How well do we factor in persons living with disabilities? And what lessons can we draw from countries like Kenya, and other countries where we can see that persons with disabilities already hold senior legislative positions?
The argument is the same. If I ask you right now how equipped your studio is for different shapes of persons with disability, and there are different sections, there are different experiences to disability. If I asked you how equipped your studio is to have a blind presenter, if I asked you how equipped your studio is to have a person with mobility disability, how equipped is your studio to have that? And so if I were a person with disability who is wanting to get a job with your organization, even if you thought me excellent, and this happens a lot. Look, we think you're excellent, we think you can do the job, but we just don't have the facilities to cater for your need. And that argument sounds legitimate. That argument sounds like, well, you know, we don't want to injure the person. We just want to make sure, and since we don't have that, what laws do is that they make the burden of accessibility, the burden of opening the door, is not on the person who is not in control of their disability. It's on the people who should be opening the door.
Now,
you can look across governments, state governments, state national assemblies, federal, the National Assembly at the federal. You can look across board, and you can see that even though there is a law that was hard fought, took 20 years to pass to ensure that persons with disability are better accommodated within the society, none of those spaces have representation for people with disability. What do you think will happen to the implementation of the law? And I'm referring to the law, I forget the specific title of that law now, but it was passed in 2021 or 2022. I'm beginning to forget now. What do you think will happen to the implementation of that law if we have more persons with disability in the room where the decisions are being made? So the argument is really the same. So the beauty of equality and diversity and equity and inclusion is that it makes things better for everybody. And I think that would be my answer to that question. Clearly, we have a society that wants to pretend like we don't have persons with disability. But we do have this person, and they're contributing to society at different levels, at different cadres. They have the ability, but the burden, the responsibility of making sure they can access places, positions, for example, again, to use the example of inclusion in the political landscape, that burden is not on them to figure out. It's not on them to convince Nigerians that they should vote for them. That burden is on the burden bearers. It's on the people making the laws. The burden is on the people sitting on the bill right now, gender equality bill, for example, or sitting in the room where they can propose such bills right now. The burden is on them to make sure that when these people show up, there is freedom, there is access, there is to actually show up in their full selves.
Now, Adenike, beyond politics, how much progress have we made in terms of attending to the plight of people living with disabilities in Nigeria in the last 10 years, for example? Are we moving the needle? Are we moving the needle at all? Are we still the same in terms of accessibility and attention to the plight of people living with disability in general as a people?
Yeah. Okay, so Discrimination Against Persons with Disability Prohibition Act 2018, that bill was passed into law, and that bill had provisions for many things, the list of which is making public buildings, public institutions accessible. I mean, that's like the least of it. There's supposed to be a national commission. It does exist, a national commission for persons with disability. The law exists. There's just no real implementation of that law. So what is happening is that even though there's a law that should prohibit certain things, for example, banks are public buildings and they are required by law to make their buildings accessible. I can ask you now to think about a bank or any bank that you've been to in the last couple of weeks and think about accessibility in those places. So the law exists. Implementation is where we have failed and where we continue to fail in Nigeria. And we're failing we're failing ourselves as a nation because persons with disability are not a separate clan of people that are removed from us. So the simple answer to your question is we've not done well. We're failing to take responsibility. We're failing to even implement a law that exists. Well, that law had a window of, just a window where institutions, organizations are supposed to sort of like an adaptation window of about, I think.
Yeah, that was, I think there was a 5-year grace. There was a 5-year grace period for
Yes.
that law in 2018. Unfortunately, we're still going to a lot of buildings that don't have wheelchair access.
Absolutely.
We have a long way to go when it comes to, well, I want to believe we're making progress. I mean, we're seeing arms here in Lagos State, for example. We're seeing people who are championing the cause, who are leading institutions that advocate for persons living with disabilities. One of them happens to be your namesake, Adenike Aloba. But let's now talk about the seriousness of our lawmakers. It's one thing for them to say that part of the conversations that will be put forward is at the constitutional review is the prioritizing of women and persons with disabilities in politics and leadership positions. However, from what you see, do you have faith that it's not just going to be mere talk, mere rhetoric, and just, you know, something to look good and make it look like what they're doing, they're really prioritizing women? Or do you think that it's just one of those things that will, again, be a subject of conversation, but not get to a logical conclusion?
Do I have faith? I'm not sure faith is what I have. Hope is what I have. Hope that after all these years, there is more clarity as to why this needs to happen. Hope that there's been enough pressure built to ensure that this bill finally moves over the line. So do I have faith? And I won't comment to, you know, just the history of, you know, politicians and how they play the politics. I won't comment on the ability, interest, however we want to put it, of the National Assembly to get this over the line. But I do have hope. I have hope that there's been enough work done thus far to make sure that this gets over the line. I have hope that we're not tired of fighting, that we're not tired of talking, that we're not tired of winning over, because there's going to be a lot of that. A lot of things that we assume is common sense, like, I don't have to explain this to you. Well, the reality is we probably have to explain with a nice smile on our face. You know, that's the burden we bear. By we, I mean the community fighting for equality and representation across the board. So do I have faith? Am I like, oh yeah, this is going to happen? No. Am I hopeful? I'm very hopeful that we can finally get it over the line.
All right, Adenike, thank you very much for joining us. I don't know if we got any final questions before we wrap things up.
She's answered it in the best way. Hope. I mean, that's all we have, and I appreciate your positive mindedness, and we really hope that it goes beyond just the talk shop and empty promises, and we really see action when it comes to the plight of women and people living with disability. Thank you so much for your time and insights.
Thank you. It was my pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you.